Hey everyone, welcome back. Happy Thursday. I am very happy that you all are joining us this evening. I'm really excited about tonight's topic. It's one of my favorites and definitely an area that I've personally seen a lot of contractors successful in. So, I wanted to talk a little bit today about how do you sell a new idea to the government, right? Whether that is a product that you're selling or a different innovative way to provide a service, maybe there's a gap that you see that exists in the market and have a solution or an idea to fill again. Um, these are all very exciting instances for me, and I love when contractors come to me with these uh, type of issues. And basically, regardless of whether it's a product or a service, it's a very similar scope in the sense that we have to find who our targeted audience is. So, like going back to the basics, sales 101. Think back if you're new with us. What I realized the last couple years is that contractors, when they start their business and they form their LLC, they're skipping over the whole business plan completely. So they're not actually doing that research to determine, okay, this is the product or service that I'm going to sell. Who's the targeted audience for this product or service? What is my plan to reach them? What's my intended results? And then with that comes revenue projections and, research proof of concept, right? So typically, just the process in completing a business plan does expose you to starting to think about who a targeted audience would be for this product. And is there enough of that targeted audience to justify the investment, whether that be time, money, or resources, right? So that's just very basic anything you're going to sell. Those are the steps that you kind of want to go through to justify, is this a viable idea? Now, the second layer to that is there might be more of a market, right? You could sell that commercially, you could sell it state, local, maybe education, maybe federal. But all of those instances, those are different types of buyers, right? So when we think about government contracting, we think about this one big entity that is the federal government, but there's so many different layers to federal government, right? So I'll give an instance where a gentleman came to me and he had a vision of a way to provide an existing service, which was emergency medical care, in a different scope that it wasn't currently offered by anyone on the market today. So, my first step, and instinctively having the sales background that I do, is who buys what you sell, right? And he was right. Nobody has bought it like that in the past. So, we had to go look for the likely suspects, right? And when you think about likely suspects, you think, who does this product or service benefit? Who will this bring value to? And, that could be, targeting by title. That could be, if you're thinking about government, targeting by either the buying command or the mission or the program that that product or service fits into. So if you don't necessarily have that information and you don't do that research, you kind of end up shooting blind and throwing money at the wall, right? So because there won't be a whole lot of data for something that hasn't been purchased before, you can look for a comparable product or service. In this instance, it was who was responsible for disaster relief as it relates to um, a specific type of natural disaster. So we were able to trace that back to the particular agency that dealt, and no, it wasn't FEMA. Contrary to popular belief, it was not FEMA. And this gentleman proposed this idea, not even an official, unsolicited proposal process, a human conversation, like Natasha and I have here most Thursdays, a very human conversation, a thought exchange, right? And the individual that he was speaking to happened to be the small business person for that agency. That small business person then took it up the food chain. took it to the program manager, took it to the contracting officer. Because keep in mind, guys, procurement is a team effort. Your contracting officer is just the decision maker. They finalize the bid package, they're checking for errors, they're cross-referencing, the activity against the FAR, making sure that everything's in order, and then signing and awarding the contract, right? But they're not always the individual who is struggling with the pain points that your product or service meets. So when, that's one very good reason why a lot of times, you'll fire off emails to contracting officers and you won't get an answer. Or perhaps they'll introduce you to the small business liaison if they don't have 10,000 emails in their inbox that day. But a lot of folks complain to me that COs or KOs are unresponsive. And it's not necessarily that they're unresponsive, it's just they're probably not the right person to receive you. So back to the story. This individual did get a meeting with the procurement team. They loved the idea, they loved what they had to say. And today, I'm happy to say that he has a 5-year a 5-year blanket purchase agreement with that particular agency for that service. And he's the only one providing it. So, but we did the research, right? He didn't just go emailing every agency under the sun with this new idea. He identified who his targeted market for it is, spent his time wisely, and it doesn't always happen. This is my disclaimer. It doesn't always happen that you get so fortunate on the first meeting, right? Sometimes it takes a few meetings. Sometimes depending on the time of year, and how you present your value, it may not connect with the other individual. So if you don't understand what their pain points are and how your solution will meet their needs, you may miss an opportunity to uh, keep the process moving along. Now, from the product side is a little bit different because it has been admittedly longer than I care to admit since a small business has came to me with a new product idea. Now, we have the SBIR and the STTR, for technology transfer and whatnot. But I'm talking about an actual product, right? If you have a product that's not currently sold or have an idea for a product that's not currently sold on the market, there are typically steps, but a lot of folks struggle with, how do I know it's the right time? Because I've got to I got to figure out the specs. I've got to find a manufacturer. There's agreements to be drawn up. You know, they might want a stake in it. So there's a lot of logistics in creating that new product. If you happen to have the relationships in the manufacturing space, that tends to be a lot more in your favor, or if you happen to be a machine shop yourself. But it does take an intricate knowledge to be able to identify where the gaps in the products exist. This isn't really something you can middleman, if you want to use that term, because if you're going to design a product specifically for the government, that is going to take a lot of time and research and talking to folks, essentially, to identify the gap that exists in the market, unless you're already an expert in that market and have the knowledge to know that it exists. But my favorite is, the organic sales process. I've got this idea. This is what it does. This is the gap. It currently fits in the market. Who's my customers? Who's my targeted market? As a data nerd, that's me all day. I love doing that type of research. I love, even digging in the free databases, USAspending.gov, SAM.gov, um, even FPDS.gov. I'll take it back old school. DSBS, even. There are ways to find companies, and good old fashioned Google, of course, manufacturers, for example. A lot of manufacturers that used to be registered for government contracting, some closed their doors, some got bought up by some of the larger companies. So it's a lot harder to find a machine shop these days than it used to be. So, they're kind of a hot commodity. And if you have a relationship with a machine shop or a manufacturer that has some unique capability, that could be the basis of a new product or a new idea that you then resell to government. Where I caution you would be is if you are not sure that that product or service, for that matter, would be useful in government, talk to someone and get a proof of concept first. Make sure that, there's a reasonable market and a need that exists. And, that's one reason I always, try to urge new contractors into subcontracting, because there's something to be said for what you can learn from these prime contractors, um, even from the customers of the contracts that you're working on, where they play golf, for example. What other pain points exist outside of just that contract in the agency? What's keeping them up at night? And getting very good at active listening, and this is, honing in on our BD skills, getting very good at active listening. Over time, your brain will start to pick up on, opportunities when you hear them. And it might take you going to the drawing board and building a team that can solve that problem. But if you're listening, that's where you get the intel, and have your ear to the ground way before anything ever hits the streets. So if there's a gap that exists and you happen to be privy to it, you definitely want to act fast, because if you don't think about it, someone else will. And I will say that tonight's topic, by the way, was stemmed from an audience question that we received. And this individual is a newcomer to the government contracting space and provides a product or service that no one else has or can offer, and wanted to know if they should work with state and local before federal. Is it necessary, and why or why not? So, in this respect, and I will say that I'm answering this way only because the information that was given to me is you have a new product and service that nobody else has it, that no one else can offer it. That leads me to say, don't limit yourself, right? Because if that pain point exists at the SLED and at the federal level, now, granted, it can be a lot easier to play in the SLED sandbox when you are a first time. It really does also depend on the product or service. I don't know if this is a service or product where you're going to be subject to NIST 800-171. I don't know if it's a product that if it's software, or are we talking FedRAMP? I mean, it depends. Is the sort of overall answer. But in the instance that it is a product and you understand who the targeted market is, I would get registered at those levels, at the SLED level with your state, and always start in your backyard, because the state economic development divisions, they have a vested interest to grow their state. So your home state is always going to be the state that is going to give you a little extra push. You'll have a network of advocates within your state. So I would definitely say don't exclude federal, but if you know that there's a pain point that exists, and within the federal government, get to the human whose pain point is solved with your solution, and that will be your advocate, right? And a lot of folks think that it's a decision maker. Well, if the decision maker, the CO or the KO, does not have that pain point, they're not going to necessarily see the value in your product or service. But if that product or service is brought to them by the customer, the end user, and says, hey, I really need this. This is going to save me X amount of time. This is going to make us, 33% more productive. This is going to um, allow us to save X amount of dollars, just whatever that might be. Them taking it to that decision maker is a surefire way to get a contracting process started. Because remember, guys, the only thing that has to happen before the market research and the contracting process begins is that a need has to be determined. So whether the government already knows that they need this or whether you convince them that they need it, there's no difference. So now there are things that you do have to take into consideration, or that they will, I should say. What's the dollar figure on this product? Because if you have a product that nobody else has, and if I'm the government, I can buy that product for under $10,000, I can swipe my procurement card. Why is that important? Because that's a micro purchase. And micro purchases, there's very little risk, right? $10,000 or under, there's minimal oversight on contracts like that. And they're able to take a risk on someone that's new for under $10,000. And if they like that product or service, larger purchases can result from that. So I have to give a shout out to Mike Lejeune and Josh Frank on this subject, because they recently did an episode in Inner Circle on creating your micro offer. And I do work with a lot of service providers who, they provide us a service, and the way that they provide that service, the tab ends up being so expensive that it becomes difficult to be new in the space and get the government to take a risk on you when it is something that's already available, right? So in that case, we go back and, okay, what is a micro offer? What is a small dollar amount offer where, it will allow us to get a foot in the door to introduce our level of expertise in this area, and something that would be low risk for our targeted buyer, knowing that the government's very risk adverse. So I just want to let you guys know. I see those of you watching. Hi, Don Watt. Appreciate you joining us today. And if you guys have any questions on the subject, feel free to watch them in the chat. I know we're streaming multiple locations, but I am watching on YouTube. Those are the comments that are most easily visible of all the platforms. So that's where I am watching. If anybody wants to leave a comment, ask a question, please do drop your comments in there. And when it comes to market research, so let's do a little bit of market research, shall we? And I'm going to show you how I look for opportunities or for buyers of a new product or service. Now, let's say that we're selling a unique product that would be utilized in the instance of a disaster, and it's available on the market in another form. Let's go with a sandbag. But this particular sandbag maybe inflates when water's added to it, right? So I happen to know that this product does actually exist, but I also happen to know that there is no spending for it. So if you guys see the side of my face here, don't mind me. It's because I have two screens and I am sharing. So let me make sure. Hopefully you guys can see that. All right. So I'm on usaspending.gov. And when you land on USA Spending, this is what it looks like. I just go start searching awards. And in this case, we're just looking up sandbag, right? Because I don't need to put the type of sandbag or the material, because I'm not looking for polyurethane sandbags or burlap sandbags. I just want to see who buys sandbags. Because what I have is a type of a sandbag, right? It's not what they traditionally bought, but it's kind of like that. So it stands to reason that if someone has bought sandbags in the past and mine has a differentiator, they would be interested to know about my sandbag given the differentiator. So let's just go and see. I'm going to select just the last 3 federal fiscal years. I'm just looking at recent spending here. And I'm seeing 181 contracts one IDV, which is indefinite delivery vehicle, 2 grants, direct payments, loans. We don't really look too much at that stuff. We can filter them out if we wanted to, but I can see that John Pack is the one who has this IDIQ with the Army for sandbags. So not only is the Army a targeted market or a targeted customer of mine, but John Pack might also have other customers that would be interested in my differentiated sandbag, right? So I might also reach out to John Pack and see if they might be interested in reselling my sandbags because I know they already have customers for sandbags. You see how that makes sense? And then going back to contracts here, I can see, and these are automatically sorted, by the way, by dollar amount, but I can see at the top was the same company, and they're getting the largest portion of the market share. So I know immediately they're going to be my competitor for this new product. And in government contracting, it is no secret, you might have heard this before along the way, but in this space, we don't necessarily call them our competitors. I'm going to reference a term coined by my friend Judy Bratt. In this space, we call them competimates, because today you might be bidding against them, and tomorrow you might be working with them, and likewise. We have a question from the audience, so I'm going to pause just a moment and answer this question. Just submitted a proposal with an agency, reached out after seeing them on the attendee list pre-bid call and asked if they're willing to work with me and teach me the ropes. Well, I hope that that went in your favor. Jennifer, how did it go? Did they respond to you? And if they didn't, or if you didn't get the answer that you were expecting, there are some ways that you can modify that approach, that we could certainly have an episode about, how to communicate your value to government and prime. Yes, they did go for it and you submit tomorrow. Excellent. That's wonderful. And I gotta say, I'm glad that you brought this up. I'm really glad that you brought this up because I see a lot of contractors out here, in some of the groups beating their head against the wall, hitting brick walls, trying to get, primes to work with them. And at the end of the day, um, you definitely make a very good point, right? She brought an opportunity to them. She brought something to the table. It may not always be an opportunity. It could be a relationship with an agency that they don't yet have. It could be, a specific opportunity in a market that they're not yet in. It could be, I mean, there's so many, it could be a differentiator that you have, that's not currently on their team that they had to no-go an opportunity for last quarter. There's no way that you can possibly know these things unless you are brave enough to reach out and start the conversation with the human on the other side. So thank you, Jennifer. The power of relationships in this space, like there's something to be said for that. I mean, it's not all about bidding. And I don't know if maybe that wasn't on their radar. Maybe they're not a small business, but if this project goes well and you do a couple projects together, that might be an ideal situation where you breach the conversation of a mentor protege agreement, right? If there's synergies between the two of your companies and you perform well together and you make a good team, that's sort of how the MPPs and JVs are born, right? So maybe you'll end up pursuing contracts together. Now, I'd love to know more detail, the characteristics of each company. Was there a set aside strategy involved in that? That's sort of where my strategy brain, I'm a huge nerd when it comes to that stuff. But in the instance of these sandbags, going back to the sandbags, we've got bunker in sandbags, pilo boxes in sandbags. So what does that tell me immediately as I interpret this information and read it? Sandbags are often purchased in part of a whole. That makes sense. So there must be other suppliers that are supplying bunkers and sandbags, pilo boxes and sandbags. Those suppliers are also going to be my target. And let's go take a picture of who our targeted agencies are. Now, for this particular use case, I'm very surprised to not see FEMA on here, but we do have DoD, we have DOT, HHS, and GSA. And within those agencies, here are our sub-agencies. So my first step would be to make sure that I have a capability statement that speaks specifically to the unique product or service that I'm selling. It does not have to have all of my capabilities, because again, this is, consider it a campaign, right? When we launch a new product or service or we do a marketing campaign, there's more than just a standard, you know, old image or a marketing slick that goes out. We create a marketing piece specifically for that product or service, right? Think of your capability statement in this scenario the exact same way. That entire capability statement should be focused on that particular product or service. So, selling that product or service through that capability statement then allows you to speak to just the differentiators of that product or service. It allows you to really speak to your customer in that case, right? So I would make sure that my first stop would be the small business liaisons and small business specialists within each of the agencies that you see here. I would make sure that the SBA is aware, my local PCRs know about this new product or service. Also, I would ask those small business specialists for introductions to the customers because I also want the customers to know about these products or services, right? Keeping in mind that the agency or command that awards the contract may or may not be the customer. So that's why I say that, you go to your liaison first and then, you ask for the customer. Could you track down the customer? Sure. You could download this report. You could identify the funding office. The funding office would be your customer. But I do find that it does make a lot bigger of an impact when you get a warm introduction from someone within the agency. Jennifer said it's for an innovation accelerator program. They've done accelerator programs, but not innovation and pitch contests. I've done innovation and pitch contests, but not accelerator programs. That sounds like a perfect match. Thank you for sharing that. So, just to recap, for those of you who may not be watching the chat in the comments on YouTube, I'm going to go ahead and cut the sharing off real quick to do this recap. All right, well, for some reason, I am not able to cut off the screen share. So Jennifer is saying that she has experience in the um, the innovation and pitch contests, but the prime or the teaming partner did not. They had the experience in the accelerator program. So together, they were able to meet the need for that specific solution. And I hope, best of luck to you, Jennifer. I really hope that that opportunity works out. And I hope that you will come back and share with us the outcome of that. Now, win or lose, this is important. So since you just submitted that proposal, whether you win or whether you lose, be sure to ask for a debriefing from the CO. And, they don't always have to give it to you, like if it's a very small dollar amount, but the FAR states that if you ask, even though it doesn't, it doesn't need to be a formal meeting, they're supposed to provide you with some feedback, even just via email as to why you lost or won. And I think it's important in business, especially since we're investing our heart and our souls into government contracting with every ounce of time and energy that we have in our being. Why wouldn't we want to know what we did right or what we did wrong so that we can make sure to get better next time, you know? And we don't win them all. We can't win them all. It's impossible to win them all. But 70% of what the government buys, they buy over and over and over again. So even if you don't win right now, there's always next year. Or if it's an IDIQ or 5 years, or if it's SOUP 6, maybe 10. But nonetheless, there's more than just one opportunity out there. So thank you everyone for joining me this evening. I hope Natasha is feeling better. We will be here next week, same time, same place. And I look forward to you all's questions coming through the form. So we have gotten enough questions to fill up February. I am out of questions for March. So please, please, please get your questions in. You'll find the link to the form in the description section. You'll also find it in my Facebook group on, it's called Government Contracting Community, parentheses, GovConHacks. So please do find your way there, pop in and say hello, submit your questions, and we look forward to talking with you next week. Bye, everyone.